Hello and welcome. I'm Munjulanda, and this is the Asian Chronicle. Today, with us in conversation is Yeghia. He is the International Affairs Cluster Coordinator at the Asian Affairs Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, and instructor in political science in the American University of Beirut. I wanted to start with asking that only today there was a Lebanese prime minister that's been appointed. That's a very huge development in the Lebanese circumstances today. And given that the president was only elected a couple of days ago, how do you see this coming across, given that he's an ICJ judge and he is not very pro Iran and more on the Western side of things?
Thank you. Yes, of course, we can say that this was a positive development in the sense that we have a president and then a prime minister in just 3 or 4 days, because usually in Lebanon, because of the complex political and the sectarian system, it used to take a lot of time. So Judge Nawaf Salam, as you said, he's the head of the International Court of Justice. He was also a former diplomat. Yes, to some extent, we can say that he's not close to Iran. He has good relations, I can say, with the Americans, most probably, and also the Arab world. And I think the most important issue for Lebanon now is to renormalize the relations with the surrounding, especially the Arab world.
Right. So when we're talking about the Arab world, this also brings me to my next question that over past some time, the Arab world has seen a lot of turmoil, especially with how Turkey has been reacting to the Middle Eastern conflict that has been going on, and so has Iran, right? So I wanted to ask, how do you think this is affecting the Middle Eastern conflict, especially given the Gaza war that has been going on? And do you think that the delay in the ceasefire has been a more political stance than a technical problem or than a logistical problem?
I mean, it is not secret that in the Sunni Arab world there is certain competition between the Turkish axis, I can say, in the Turkey plus Qatar, and also the Saudi, Emirati, and the Egyptian axis. And this competition started also with the early phase of the Arab Spring. In 2011, the Sunni monarchs in the Gulf states were a bit concerned about the protest movement, and they took some reactionary policies in that sense. Also, let's not forget, because Turkey and Qatar has been supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood in the region, and this is something also which contradicts the interests of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and also Egypt. We have seen this actually in Syria, where the HTS government, with close links to some extent to Turkey. Initially, the Arab countries were a bit hesitant, but later also they start normalizing with the current administration, maybe with the plan or the idea to co-opt the current administration in Syria and strengthen relations, and in order to maybe contain the Turkish interests in Syria. However, there will be also cooperation between Turkey and the Arab Gulf states, especially when it comes to reconstruction of Syria, because Turkey doesn't have enough resources, the financial resources, to reconstruct Syria. We are talking about $500 billion. Also, the case is in Lebanon. Despite the fact that Turkey has some influence in Lebanon, it is limited, especially in the north. But we have seen that with the election of the president and the prime minister, the Saudi influence has increased at the expense of other countries' influence, such as Iran, or maybe to some extent a bit Turkey.
Right. So this also brings me to my next question: that how the Middle Eastern or the West Asia, how we refer to it, how it has been boiling over time. Even with the Assad government falling in Syria, do you see a change in the scenario in a way that the entirety of the Middle East finds some sort of stability with the changing governments?
I don't want to be pessimistic, but also I don't want to be very optimistic. I would say that there is a cautious optimism, in the sense that in the fall of the Assad regime would bring some maybe political stability in Lebanon, because the Syrian government used to interfere in the domestic affairs of the Lebanon. This has been something like, it is historic. It's not just something new. However, definitely there will be also repercussions. I mean, the rise of the political Islam, or also the rise of jihadi groups in certain areas in Syria, also raised some concerns in Lebanon, because we have the experience of 2013 and 2014 when Hezbollah intervened in Syria. It fought in Syria. At the same time, the rise of ISIS and the Jubhat al-Nusra, which is now called HTS. It killed some of our Lebanese soldiers in the bordering areas. It engaged in terrorist activities. So there was some concern in Lebanon that what if these movements, which are now rebranded as moderate, let's say, Islamist movements, would go back to radicalism and engage in sectarian tensions? Because my main concern is the following, that the multicultural fabric of Syria is very important because it also reflects the multicultural fabric in Lebanon. If Syria goes towards the homogeneous path and would see that more ethnic or sectarian cleansing in Syria, this would have also negative repercussions in Lebanon, and we would see sectarian tensions in Lebanon, as it was the case in 2013, 2014. Hopefully, until now, there are, although limited violations, but things are under control. And it seems that the Turks, the Arabs, and also the Americans want to contain the conflict in Syria and engage in conflict management, maybe conflict resolution, hopefully also in the future. This will have a positive repercussion or impact on Lebanon. So I think it is dependent what will happen in Syria. If there will be a positive transition, democratic transition, definitely it will have also a positive impact on Lebanon.
Right. So, when we talk about the Middle Eastern politics and how the political scenario has been recently, there are multiple conflicts going on right now. The Lebanon conflict, the Syria conflict, and of course, there's also the Israel-Gaza war going on. So, with all of these conflicts going on at the same time, do you think the Middle Eastern politics and how the conflict has risen to a point where the entire area is at a boiling point? Do you think this could actually lead to something that's a little more global in its repercussions? Because we see a lot of external factors getting involved. So, also, I would want to continue the question by asking that what do you think, how do you think the involvement of external factors like United States, Russia, and China, how has this impacted the regional conflict in the area?
Definitely. As you said, there are a lot of boiling points in the region. The Israeli-Gaza conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the more Israel annexes Palestinian territories, this will create more radicalism, more poverty, more injustice. And I always say the conflict in Palestine or Israel didn't start in October 7. Its roots goes back to the 1940s and 50s. And what had happened on October 7 was a reaction of the injustice against the Palestinians. So hopefully not, but it is my fear, given also some, let's say, right-wingers in the Trump administration, if they will recognize the Israeli sovereignty on the West Bank or Gaza, as they did actually on the occupied Golan Heights, it means this will trigger more radicalization in the region. The just resolution of the Palestinian conflict and the Palestinian statehood is a must for peace in the region. Otherwise, there will never be peace. There will be more ethnic cleansing, more terrorist activities, more violence, and so forth. Of course, there is also the second point is the Israeli-Lebanese front. Israel keeps violating the Lebanese airspace. It has bombed Lebanese villages. It still occupies certain villages, almost 60 villages in the south. Hopefully, because it is mentioned in the ceasefire agreement that in 60 days, no more, the Israelis should withdraw from all Lebanese territories. My concern is that if this is extended, it would create repercussions, and Hezbollah maybe would retaliate to Israeli violations, and this would trigger another conflict. Another issue, of course, is the Syrian Israeli front, where after the oust of or the toppling of the Assad regime, the Israeli army, it violated the de facto, let's say, the border between Syria and Israel, and occupied new territories in Syria. This is why I think external factors is very necessary to de-escalate the conflict. I mean, we have to see how Trump's administration will react to these violations. Also, the role of China and India as external factors, even though they are not influential as China as U.S., but China, I think, let's not forget broken agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So stability in the region is in the interest of China, and also stability in the region is also in the interest of India because we have the IMEC and other corridors. So the more the region is stabilized, the more it is positive for the external actors. The more there is terrorism, the more there is violence, it will not serve the interest of the external factors. Here, I didn't talk about Russia a lot, but after the toppling of Assad regime, we have seen that there is withdrawal of Russian political influence in the region, especially from Syria, even though still not clear that whether the Russians will preserve their military base in the coast of Syria or not.
Right. So when we talk about Hezbollah, this brings me to my next question that I've been wanting to ask. That what do you think that all these non-state actors or non-state factions in the area, maybe Hamas or maybe Hezbollah, how do you think they affect the regional conflicts to a point, and how do you think that involvement has impacted the dynamics of all these conflicts?
We have seen the activities or like the proactivity of these non-state actors in the region, especially after the war in Iraq. Because of this, let's say, the sectarian or the ethnic fabric of the region in the West Asia or the Middle East, for example, if something happens to the Kurds in Syria, the Kurds in Turkey, Iran, and Iraq will be affected. And if attacks or terror attacks, as it happened against the Shia mosque and the Syrians in Iraq, the Shias in Lebanon, Iran, and other areas were also affected. Because the non-state actors became transnational, and with the global multipolar region, the transnational actors had more space to maneuver. I mean, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, the militias in Iraq, and also the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, the Houthis in Yemen, for example, blocked the trade passing via the Red Sea. However, with the whether we call it defeat or let's say the containing of the containment of the axis of resistance, the so-called axis of resistance in the region, which is like the non-state actors allied with Iran, their role to some extent have been minimized. I won't say diminished. Still, it's early to judge, but it has been minimized. Hamas military wing has been minimized. Hezbollah took very heavy blows. The Iraqi militias didn't intervene in Syria. It seems that there is a cautious, let's say, approach from these actors not to engage in more attacks, mostly because they are waiting what will happen between the West and Iran. There are nuclear talks, whether this will succeed or actually the Americans and the Israelis will bomb Iran. This is also open to question. So I believe that for now, the role of the non-state actors have been to some extent diminished, minimized, but not diminished yet.
Right. So this also brings us to the question of what the resolution of any of these conflicts would be like. So I would like to start with the Israel-Palestine resolution. Do you think that a two-state solution is actually a solution for the entire conflict? And if not a two-state solution, then what else? And additionally, do you think that there is a potential role that the regional actors like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, or Lebanon have been playing in such an ideation of maybe a potential solution there?
Maybe if you had asked me this question 15 years ago, I would say that the two-state solution is the only solution. But now with just checking the map and the expansion of the Israeli settlements and the ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians, the borders are zigzags. For example, if a Palestinian villager will go to another village, he or she has to pass with several settlement or Israeli military checkpoints. It's very difficult. So how we can establish a Palestinian state given the expansion of the Israeli settlements? This is why we need a pressure from the US and the European Union so that Israel gives up the settlements. This is very difficult now. Because the Israelis also are thinking they have won the war, so they have the upper hand to force the Palestinians. Another maybe proposal that can be worked on is somehow a one-state solution, but it needs more a dialogue, first of all, between the Arabs and the Israelis, the Palestinians and the Israelis, and also the Palestinians themselves and the Israelis themselves. Because my concern is that reading the Israeli newspapers reflecting the official Israeli narrative, they don't want to coexist with the Palestinians. They want to cleanse the Palestinians. They are saying that actually no, West Bank belongs to ancient Jewish kingdoms and the Arabs are not indigenous and so forth. This is very dangerous. At the same time, again, I think the most important thing is that how external factors they will shape the Palestinian and the Israeli dialogue in the future. However, again, my concern is that the Trump administration may just give a green light to Israel and support or legitimize the annexation of West Bank. This will create a lot of chaos in the region because the Palestinians may, if ethnically cleansed, they would be deported to Jordan or other countries. This would also create a refugee crisis and a national security issue for neighboring countries, whether Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt.
Right. So, we spoke about the refugee crisis that is developing in the area, even with the second Nakba that this war is being called, when after October 7th attack, the previous year has seen a lot of refugees actually fleeing the Gaza Strip and even West Bank for that matter. And there have been certain developments that have actually put a lot of things at stake and a lot of things in question, that even with West Bank, the retaliation has not been as strong as it was supposed to be, or it was assumed that it would be. The retaliation that Gaza Strip has shown, the West Bank has not exactly shown it. So, has that affected in some way how the Islamic world or how the Arabic world is reacting to, say, the conditions that other Arabs are sustaining in the Gaza Strip?
And let's not forget that Gaza is ruled by Hamas, while the West Bank is ruled by the Palestinian Authority, mainly the Fatah organization, with close links to Egypt, United Arab Emirates, and mainly also Saudi Arabia. However, my concern is that the more the Israeli settlements expand in West Bank, the people in the West Bank will explode. Yes, there was a lot of betting that at the same time, simultaneously with the crisis in the war in Gaza, the people, the Palestinians in the West Bank would rise, they would take up arms and fight against the Israelis, and maybe the Israelis were concerned about it. But this didn't happen, interestingly. I think this needs a lot of research, why the Palestinians in West Bank, they took a very passive stance, or where the Palestinian Authority took a passive stance. But I think this was a part of the pressure from the Americans and the Gulf countries in this sense. However, as I said, we have to see also which direction. If after a possible ceasefire, which is being talked like in the coming hours, maybe, hopefully, we would see a ceasefire in Gaza. My concern is that the Israelis would now, they shift their attention to the West Bank. Because the Lebanese front, there is to some extent a ceasefire, even though fragile. And after Gaza, they would try to enforce their sovereignty and annex the West Bank. This would create a lot of tensions in the region.
Right. So, do you think that with the changing American government, and there's also a leftover election, there's a delay in elections in Israel as well. Do you think a shift in the government in Israel and a shift in the government in America would actually affect how the Middle Eastern conflicts have been going, and especially the Gaza conflict?
The new, let's say, the possible new government in Israel will not be softer than this government, because even the opposition is taking very harsh lines or hard lines against the Palestinians. There is not a single Israeli political party, a major political party, which is calling for coexistence between the Palestinians and the Israelis, or a two-state solution, or at least something, a solution, which is to some extent is at least the minimum rights, political and economic and religious or cultural rights to the Palestinian people. I haven't seen anything like it. Instead, the Israeli politics is going to very extreme right wing. And this is not something positive, not just for the Arabs, but the Israeli themselves. I mean, I rarely have heard, for example, Israeli leftists, it's very limited, but at least calling for somehow a conflict resolution for the crisis. Same is also with the Trump administration. I have concerns because, at least what I have heard from the news and the media outlets, the U.S. ambassador to appointed ambassador or the new ambassador to Israel is very pro-Zionist. He also has called for the annexation of West Bank to Israel. This will not have a positive impact on the conflict resolution. Resolving a conflict very quickly without taking into consideration the culture, the political fabric of the people, especially the Palestinians, will create a new conflict in the future.
Could you maybe take me around the conversations about Abraham Accords has come up as a possible solution for the conflicts that has been going on? Could you maybe shed a little light on what does that mean and how could it actually give light to any possible solution in the conflict?
Before the October 7 operation, there were some reports in the media that the Saudis and the Israelis were also trying or attempting to normalize relations. The Saudi condition was that at least the two-state solution or something for the Palestinian people. However, the October 7 operation started, and now I'm not sure that the Israelis are ready to accept any Palestinian statehood in Palestine. At the same time, the normalization between some of the Gulf states and North African Arab states with Israel has not positively impacted the Palestinian issue. Instead, the Palestinian crisis or the issue was sidelined. So basically, the Arab countries didn't bring the Palestinian issue as a condition when it comes to normalizing their diplomatic or economic relations or establishing diplomatic and economic relations with Israel. And the Palestinians felt marginalized and isolated or blackmailed maybe by their Arab brotherly countries. I think this is very important in the future to be discussed and addressed that when it comes to normalizing any Arab country with Israel, the Palestinian issue should be conditioned, and there should be also one Arab vision for the Palestinian issue. If the two-state solution now is dying, then let's propose any solution. The problem is that we don't have any proposal on the table. We're talking about the two-state solution as Arab countries. However, we know that on reality on the ground, the two-state solution cannot be implemented given the military and the expansionist reality of the Israelis on the ground. So it seems that the Arabs should propose a new solution maybe, and they need to engage with the Americans and other great powers and the Europeans maybe, and also the regional countries such as Turkey in order to shape somehow a conflict resolution in Palestine.
This also brings me to the question that how do you think is the Middle Eastern political and, for that matter, regional stability looks like in the upcoming few years with no possible solutions in sight except for a ceasefire? There are no steady solutions, there are no permanent solutions in sight as of now, even with mediation of Turkey and other countries, including America. Despite a lot of ceasefire proposals, ceasefires have been brought down and they've been broken. So we see that all of these temporary solutions have been brought about, temporary solutions have been talked about, but no permanent solution has come out, despite the fact that ICJ and the UN has condemned what Israel has been doing in the area. So Israel has not only affected the Gaza Strip, it has also affected regions around it, including Syria, including Lebanon, including all the regional powers that have been somehow supporting Gaza in its war. Or if not its war, they're at least supporting it in logistical senses. How do you see the landscape changing, or how do you see the landscape not changing for that matter in the Middle Eastern area?
Yes, judging from history and historical experiences in the region, any agreement, whether ceasefire agreement or temporary arrangement, or at the ashes or on the ashes of ethnic cleansing or genocide, will create new conflicts in the region because it would trigger antagonism, it would create racism, it would create hatred and maybe revenge motives. We have seen the Palestinian issue. When it with the establishment of the Israeli state in 1948 and the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, we have seen that the Palestinian youth became radicalized because of this issue. and self-defense took a militaristic approach. And this is the case. We always say that if the Palestinian conflict has been resolved justly, there would be no legitimacy for any non-state actor in the region. There will be no legitimacy for violence to some extent in the region. Even some regimes would lose legitimacy if the Palestinian crisis is resolved in a just way, which provides the political, ethnic, and cultural and religious rights to the Palestinian people. My concern is that what we would see in the coming days in Gaza would be a temporary ceasefire, and Gaza would still be blockaded. And also we have the reconstruction of Gaza. I mean, if we will prevent the reconstruction of Gaza, we would see more young people would be radicalized. Let's not forget that every family in Gaza has lost someone, or entire families have been uprooted in Gaza. So imagine you're a 5 or 6-year-old kid and you have seen your mom or dad burning in front of you. You will not be very liberal and become a liberal person and call for coexistence. You will call for revenge. This is very normal, instinct from a human being. These issues should be addressed, hopefully in the ceasefire, and hopefully maybe we see additional Arab involvement. I don't want to see international involvement in the conflict in post, let's say, a war in Gaza. I want to see Arab presence, the Saudis, the Emiratis, even the Qataris, the Egyptians investing, but also trying to help the Palestinians to build the statehood, or the administration, whether in Gaza and the West Bank. This also needs additional pressure to be imposed on Israel. For example, I was surprised that if you will compare to the 1973 war, the Arab countries took the decision to block the engaged in the oil blockade, increase the prices, and this also forced the Western countries to pressure Israel. We haven't seen this. I mean, it is the least thing the Arabs could have done to impose an oil blockade or economic pressure, because they have the leverage against Western countries and Israel, so that Israelis would provide some compromises and agree on a compromise solution for the Palestinian conflict, but we haven't seen this. So basically, if we assume that there will be a temporary ceasefire or arrangement, but neglecting at the same time the Palestinian rights, we are just postponing a war. We're just postponing a new war.
So, like you mentioned, that the Arab countries did not respond to the war this time how they responded in the 73 war. Why do you think that is? What is possibly holding them back?
Because currently the Arabs, they lack any unified vision. Some Arab countries maybe they are thinking that the Palestinian crisis or the conflict has been burdened on them, or it's a lost cause maybe. But however, I think that no. The more there is war in Palestine or in the region, the more this war will expand. For example, as I said, if there would be a forced deportation in Palestine and there will be a refugee crisis, the first countries that would suffer it would be Jordan, Egypt. These two countries who have excellent relations with the West, they will suffer. So basically, the Western interests will also suffer in the region. This is why we're calling, saying to the Europeans and the Americans that no, we need a just resolution for the Palestinian conflicts. Otherwise, your interest will suffer. The economic interest will suffer. The corridors, the trade relations, the prosperity in the Gulf countries, it will also trigger non-state actors to engage in more violence, and it will create a sectarian tensions in the region. Everything, I think, is linked to the Palestinian crisis and its conflict resolution in the region.
This also brings me to my next question, that when you talk about expansion, do you think that the boiling over of the West Asian conflict could actually potentially lead to a more global war, maybe say a third world war, if nothing less?
I would not say a big global war, but definitely more external countries will be involved, and we would see more proxy wars in the region. I mean, for example, Syria is very important, because if there will be any political clash between Israel and Turkey, a NATO member, would also expand this conflict beyond the Middle East, especially when it comes to the Kurdish issue in Syria. The Israelis are backing the Kurds. Even they are calling openly for Kurdish separatism, even though the Kurds in Syria are not in favor, or at least they are not calling publicly for separatism. We know that the Kurdish issue is a red line for Turkey. It is a national security threat. So any civil war or proxy war in Syria would also definitely, it will expand to Iraq, to Syria. to other countries. Turkey would be also involved. Maybe Iran would be involved. This would create a sectarian tensions, and the allies of maybe Turkey and Iran would be also involved. Maybe we would see another form of Russian and American proxy battleground in Syria. So whatever happens in the Middle East definitely will have repercussions in neighboring regions such as Europe or Central Asia or even the Indian continent or the ocean. Yes, there are concerns that any proxy war would have a spillover effect on neighboring regions.
Right. So, talking about the proxy war, do you really think that the external factors, including the European Union or the United States or the UN for that matter, do you think they have enough power to actually make a difference here and stop the conflict where it is, or at least dial it down to a point where it is not affecting things to a point where basic functioning is impossible and that civilians are actually being killed? Do you think that their actions in any capacity would actually change it? Because ICJ has already imposed an arrest warrant. It has already declared Netanyahu as a war criminal, that he's been committing war crimes in the region. Do you think the just the verbalization of certain things, or just the verbal ideation of the fact that, oh, this should stop and there must be a ceasefire, do you think this pressure is enough to actually physically stop the war?
If I'm not mistaken, the ICJ also issued arrest warrant to the Sudani leader Omar al-Bashir, and he's not being detained. I think same would happen to Netanyahu, because personally also I have concerns that it will be politicized and some Western countries will back up Netanyahu, maybe if he provides certain concessions or compromise on the conflict resolution in Palestine. Also, it depends from the American. I'm not sure that the Europeans would be able to pressure, or they have enough leverage to pressure on Israel, because even the Europeans are divided. However, the Americans, they have the political tool and the political will, maybe, to impose a certain agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. But this is also depends on how Trump's new administration will view the developments in the region, whether they will repeat the same mistakes as they did in his first presidential period, or maybe he will revise these mistakes and actually force Netanyahu or a possible new Israeli administration to provide certain compromises in favor of course, peace or a peace deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Right. So this actually brings me to my last question to you today. As someone who's sitting in the middle of the conflict zone, you are in Lebanon. Lebanon has also been bombed during this fight, and it has also been directly affected. Given that there's a new administration, do you think that the new administration would actually, the new government for that matter, would change things? And how do you tell me that, how has this affected life as you know it? And how, and if at all, and when do you see things going back to normal?
I would say that I can engage in cautious optimism in Lebanon. I don't want to engage in euphoria and say that, oh, everything will be okay, even though the speech of the inauguration speech of the president was a very good one. But we should also be realistic about what we want in Lebanon. At least institutional reforms, economic reforms to lift the country from the financial crisis is a must. Stability is a must also. The implementation of the 1701 resolution, which clearly calls for a ceasefire, that is, Israel should not violate the Lebanese airspace, the land, and also should not bomb Lebanese villages at the same time, which calls for Hezbollah's disarmament in south of Litani River, are necessary. At the same time, we need a dialogue. We cannot view things as if let's say a certain group in Lebanon has won against other groups, and as if we should marginalize or isolate certain communities at the expense of other communities. We should not repeat the same mistakes. We should take lessons from history. I always say that history is our greatest Bible, because we take lessons from our history in order not to repeat the mistakes. This is why engaging in dialogue is very important in level. We have to hear the concerns, the security concerns of the people, and also certain political parties or communities in Lebanon, and gradually and together to build this country. Otherwise, we'll always become a proxy battleground, and we will go from a failing state to a failed state.
Thank you so much for speaking to the Asian Chronicle. We will keep a closer look at the boiling point in the Middle East. This is the Asian Chronicle, and I am Gunjan Anand.